So when I first started at GitHub, in my first 3 months, I did 39 events. That works out to roughly 1 event every 3 days, and I'm sure I don't have to explain to many of you why that's completely unsustainable. In the 3 months following those 3 months, I only did 12 events. And you might be asking, did Joe have a nap? Did he abandon his developers? The answer to that is no. In fact, what we did was we rolled out an external advocate program, and while I was doing 12 events, a group of student leaders called the GitHub Campus Experts were doing a further 22. That means in the 3 months following my first 3 months, we delivered 34 events compared to 39, almost matching the level of support we were able to deliver our developers, but in a way that didn't result in me driving myself ragged. We were able to sustain our community in a sustainable way. In the year since we started Campus Experts, it's gone a lot further than merely maintaining our numbers. We now have over 60 Campus Experts in 16 countries, and in the last year, they've done over 140 activities. We currently have over 1,000 Campus Experts in training. As of last night, it was 1,020. So we're now able to tell stories and support communities we wouldn't be able to before. The education team at GitHub is 3 people. There's no way we'd be able to support our community of 1.3 million developers with us alone. And those Campus Experts are true superheroes. They do amazing things like speak at our conferences on 3 continents. Here is Amy speaking at GitHub Satellite this year in London. They organize multiple 1,000-people hackathons. They throw women in tech conferences. They teach workshops in rural Cameroon. They do truly fantastic activities. And for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to be telling you how you can build and scale your own external advocacy program. We're going to do that as a 5-step process. Those 5 stages are going to start with G. We're going to talk about your groundwork, how an external advocacy program and the need for it has to grow naturally out of your strategy. We're then going to look at outcomes, how much like strategy, your outcomes, how you measure the success of your program should grow naturally out of the need of your users and then serve the need of the business. The core pillar of this framework is going to be trust. It is impossible to scale without trust. We'll come back to it repeatedly, but micromanagement does not scale. So we're going to talk about how we can establish trust with these third-party candidates, with these third-party advocates, and how we can work with them to scale our program. We're going to look at operations. You've designed this fantastic program. Now let's automate everything we can. And finally, we're going to iterate and go back through and reapply everything we've just done to build upon our existing program. That leaves me with the fantastic acronym GoTo1, which is mainly to set myself up for DevRelCon next year, because when this doesn't work, I can come and give a talk called Go To Considered Harmful. So, before I get started, I want to call out the fact that there are about 10 Campus Experts in this room right now. So if I tell you any lies, I trust they'll check me on my nonsense. We're going to come back to this in the trust section, but I'm able to give this talk giving you the insights to the strategy and the meaning behind this team because we have complete trust in our relationship between me and the experts. So let's get started and talk about groundwork. Groundwork, as I mentioned, the need for an external advocate program needs to grow naturally out of your strategy. What we're talking about here is how an external advocate program fits into the existing metrics and existing things you're trying to drive. Much like hackathons, video content, and podcasts, external advocate programs tend to grow out of teams that are under pressure, under metric pressure, under stress. We want to make sure that that's not the case and they're not being a misused tool. Back at DevRelCon Tokyo late last year, oh God, when was it? Summer this year. Wow, it's been a long year. Back in DevRelCon Tokyo, the lead of my team, John Britton, gave a talk, Marketing to Developers. And in that talk, he presented the SCOOP framework, which is how the developer marketing team at GitHub plans our work and measures success. And it's this framework, this way of planning work, that gave rise to the need for an external advocate program. So I'm going to give that example. We're going to walk through the SCOOP framework, all 5 letters of it, and see how the SCOOP framework resulted in us needing this external advocate program. As you can see, my team really likes acronyms. I copied John, just to be clear. So let's start with the S, support. As a developer marketing team, obviously we're supporting developer users. So as we've got our support channels, they could be Stack Overflow, they could be email. In our case, they're probably GitHub. We're getting regular support queries. For me in particular, as student program manager, I'm looking out for the ones from students. So I'm getting regular support queries from students. And while those queries are coming in, every now and then I'm finding myself answering the same question or having to basically repeat myself. As those questions come in, we're starting to notice patterns, and a really interesting set of patterns start to emerge, where we were seeing hackathon organizers and club leaders ask us for things like, can you come and give a workshop at our school? Can you support or fund our hackathon? Can you send us swag? How do we get into open source? And we identified that we were ending up with another subset of our users here. Our support inbox identified the group of student leaders. These student leaders had very clear needs from GitHub. They were looking for workshops and content, so when they came to us asking for that support, we would direct them in the right place. They were looking for sponsorship and swag, and they were looking for access to open source and the industry. So with those support needs very clear to us, we started to address that with content. When they were asking us for workshops, obviously, as we've already covered, I can't be on every university campus in the world. So I would provide them with links to our open source training kit that our professional services team used to train real companies. When it came to supporting their hackathons, obviously, again, I can't sponsor every hackathon in the world. So we came up with the First Time Grant, which is a way which enables us to support first-time hackathons on campuses. When it came to open source, we partnered with DigitalOcean to provide Hacktoberfest, and we worked on resources that made Hacktoberfest easier to access for students. So we've had a support need, we've made content to address that need. We've helped developers help themselves. Let's now talk about outreach to get those content out to the developers. So with the grant, we wanted to make sure that grant got to all of the new hackathon organizers. And where do you find new hackathon organizers? For us, that was a partnership with Major League Hacking. Major League Hacking provide our grant to all first-time hackathon organizers, so we don't have to think about anything. The grant gets where it needs to be. With DigitalOcean, to make Hacktoberfest more accessible, we started a meetup program. So this year was the first year it was properly on the website. Meetup organizers could sign up to hold an official Hacktoberfest event, whether that be on campus or in their local city, and get a specialized swag box. And when it came to actually getting right to the core of this audience and getting the messages where it wants to be, we sponsored HackCon. In a very similar sponsorship to this one, we have a lounge and everything. HackCon is the conference for student hackathon organizers. We went direct to that audience and we told them, hey, you had a need and we've addressed it. Here is how we've done that. So then obviously we need to start automating these things. And there's a couple of ways that we did that that really helped us out. So the first one, MLH, with this partnership, they actually fully took up the load of that process. They do all of the vetting of an event to make sure it is a first-time event, to make sure it's worthy of the grant and is actually going to happen, and then they just send us an invoice. It's a super great process. Canned replies, it sounds obvious, but having canned replies in your ticketing systems or even on GitHub is really helpful to scale. So for example, when people ask us about workshops or swag, it's really easy for us to just say, we can't come visit your campus, but here is how you host one of these workshops yourself. We also have contractors that help us with fulfillment. These are contractors we've hired, and they do things like, for example, check for swag requests in our inbox. And if we've approved that swag request, they go ahead and place that order. I cannot tell you how important this is for me. At one point, I forgot to send stickers to an event, and I had a nightmare about not sending swag to events. The contractors changed my life. This is so important. So we found a support need, we've made content to address it, we've done outreach to communicate the content we've made, and we've started to operationalize things and automate those. Now we come to the P, which is programs. This is about wrapping it all up and putting a bow on it and giving it a name. So with this program, we're looking at student leaders who have content needs around workshops, sponsorships, and opportunities. And what's really interesting here is the reason they were asking us for those things. They were asking us for those things to help their peers learn about GitHub, help their peers learn about open source, and help them become better software developers. And that leads us on to the O in GoTo, outcomes. Your outcomes of your program, what you measure the success of your program on, should come and be derived from the users. Obviously, it needs to suit the business needs. We've all heard dreadful tales of DevRel teams, as Matt started off with a joke this morning, of DevRel teams have been let go because they haven't been meeting the business needs. But actually making sure that the outcomes grow successfully out of your would-be external advocates is extremely important for their satisfaction and for their engagement with the program. We found out from our support queries that the reason students wanted these resources was because they wanted to build a technological community on their school. They look at events like DevRelCon, where we've got loads of like-minded peers in one room, and they say, I want that on campus. That is an aim that we at GitHub can get behind. That is something that helps us. If we've got a group of people who want to help teach collaborative software building, and we're a platform for collaborative software building, obviously those aims are in sync. And that became the end messaging of the program. That outcome was so perfect for us, it literally translated into messaging. And here the core thing is that the win for the student translated into a win for GitHub. You want to make sure that just as with strategy growing naturally out of support needs, your outcome grows naturally. And that framing in terms of the users is super important for other reasons. We talk a lot in DevRel to use a bit of a trope about authenticity. No one is going to listen to your external advocates if they're just swag-wearing leaflet throwers, right? They need to be able to talk about what they're talking about passionately and with conviction. And I guess another way of saying this is don't expect your external advocates to use tactics you wouldn't use yourself. If you as an evangelist or an advocate or a public speaker would be uncomfortable doing a certain activation, don't expect this unpaid representative of your company to do so. That's just not going to work. And that brings us on to trust. Trust is the center of GoTo because I think it's the most important pillar. And this sounds like it's going to be a very soft section of the talk, but actually this is super material. Without trust, you cannot scale. We're going to hit back on this repeatedly. Trust is a two-way street here. Your external advocates, again, they're probably going to be unpaid. They don't want you to take advantage of them. They're not unpaid salespeople. But equally, you've got to trust them to represent your brand. They're not employees. You don't have as many quality controls as you otherwise could do. But having that trust is all about giving them the power to make the right choices. They are local people with local context. We'll come back to this in a minute. But if you trust them and you enable them to get on with the work they're doing, and that gives them the power to make the right choices, which can help you scale. Again, micromanagement doesn't scale. If you have to constantly check in on decisions they're making, if you're constantly saying to them, like, hey, you organized this event right, have you done this talk properly, have you got this in your slides, that's not going to work at 10, 100, 200, 1,000 external advocates. So to give a very real example of this, let's talk about Columbia 4.0. This is a huge software development conference in Columbia, and they reached out to us to speak. GitHub kind of suffers from this problem where because we've got 26 million developers using the platform, people think we're really huge, but like we're barely 700 people. So everyone asked us to come to their events, and we just can't. And in this case, it was a personal ask from a conference organizer to GitHub. In this case, they asked John Britton. They'd worked with John before, and they knew he delivered great talks, and they wanted John's content for their program. We weren't able to make it at the time, we were all too busy. So John offered up a student, a campus expert, in his place. He was able to do that safely, or able to offer a student in place of himself to a professional software conference because we trust the campus experts to do a great job. The organizer accepted the substitution because the organizer is placing faith in us that we trust that student to deliver quality at the same level as John, a professional speaker, would do. And this worked out fantastically. For Kim, we sent two campus experts, Kim and Marlene. Kim wrote this amazing blog post about her first time speaking. This is Kim up on this massive stage. Between them, they delivered 4 sessions, some talks and some workshops. And they had a really rich, enriching experience as students who were participating in a professional conference. But more than that, it was great for the conference, because being able to send these campus experts gave us another way to say yes. Without these external advocates, we would not have been able to help this conference. We wouldn't have been able to go, the attendees missed out on content, we would have let down this personal contact of John, but instead we were able to actually help them out. So this is again helping us scale in a way that's really impactful, where we can say yes more often. And I mentioned earlier local knowledge. Local knowledge is important because this is where you not only save time, but you also save money. You are not on that campus, you are not in that city, you are not in that meetup. Those external advocates are. They know the best deals. They know where to find the best catering for the best price. They know the local meetup organizers and can get great deals. My favorite example of this is we have a campus expert in Taiwan who somehow convinced the professional conference to give him like a free booth, and he just kind of did it and had a booth. Just because they were like, yeah, Peter's cool, let's do it. I, as GitHub, approaching that conference would not be able to do that, right? And equally, we had a fun thing earlier where one of the campus experts came up to me at the conference and said, hey, the pizza for my event last week was a bit more than I wanted. And I was able to say, look, I know you've tried to get a cheap price. I know you know your local pizza joints. You're a student, of course you do. So I was able to just say, yeah, great, leave you to it. So how do we establish that trust? So I'm going to go through some advice here on how to establish trust, but it's really important to note that these techniques, don't take them too literally. They don't work for every audience. We'll kind of follow background on that. With the campus experts, because we're talking about students, we deliver training. This training takes them through a variety of things. It takes them through skills that they need to actually perform the duty in the field. For example, our training incorporates public speaking, community management, and workshop development. But more than that, it really communicates our expectations and our outcomes. Our community management module hits upon the need for inclusivity and the code of conduct. Our public speaking module talks about preparation. This way, the campus experts know exactly what we expect from them, and we have this really neat badge system that they can get around. But also, the training actually communicates, again, what the program is for and what we consider a successful outcome. Every student starts the training by analyzing their community and deciding what they need to add to it to result in success. And then the skills they take, the other skills they study during that training, are based upon that outcome. So right from the start, we're saying, your goal here is to make the best community possible. We are here to help you do that. They know that they're not going to be like shilling GitHub all day. So they understand what they're there for. They understand about the authenticity aspects. And we know that at the end of it, we're only going to be adding people to the program who truly know why they're there. Next up is an application. Students can take part in the training without having actually applied to be a campus expert. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is in a minute. But having this application enables us to screen for understanding. They've done the training, so in theory, they know everything that we want them to know about why the program is there, about what we expect of them. Now we run them through a really short screening. And because we've had that training, this screening can be pretty short. We essentially ask 2 questions. What do you think Campus Experts is for, and why do you want to be a part of it? And why do you think the issue of inclusivity and diversity is important in tech? And that tells us most of what we need to know that after they've done the training, we've watched them interact with the community. Those 2 parts combined tell us most of what we need to know about whether they're going to be successful on the program. The next part about building trust is keeping it real. External advocates, your MVPs, your VIPs, they are your savviest users. They are going to know if you're lying to them. You should tell them exactly why they're here, and that means telling them how the work they're doing affects the bottom line of the business. If you don't tell them this stuff, they're going to work it out themselves, and they're going to wonder why you didn't tell them. You should also tell them how their actions affect the program. For example, during a Campus Expert onboarding, we go for a section where I tell them, hey, here is the app we use to track how many events you're doing. Honestly, every time you put an event in here, it helps me advocate for the program internally, which may result in more budget in the future. And that helps them, again, make the best choices, which is what it's all about. Everything in Trust is about helping them make the best choices. And again, if you don't tell them the truth, they're going to figure it out themselves, and they're going to wonder why you just didn't come out with it. So make sure that you establish that trust, or they'll just work it out. So to round back in, the core part here, one of the things I said was training. This isn't for everyone. For example, if I was running an external advocate program based around meetups, where I was having developers run meetups in their local cities. This is something that Docker and DigitalOcean do. I wouldn't expect those meetup organizers who applied to go for a training on how to organize meetups, right? That's probably condescending. So what are the alternatives we can use to replace this training step? Well, to get to those, we have to think about what it is the training is actually doing, what function the training serves. So firstly, it's just straight up valuable to participants. Before they've even applied to be part of the program, before they've even applied to be a campus expert, they are getting a tremendous amount of educational value from us. So whatever content you substitute in place of training should be at core valuable to the people who are interacting with the program. It should be a nice, surprising delight when they join. It should expose you to the work of the individual. Through the course of the training, I see not only how campus experts approach difficult topics like analyzing a community, but how they go about writing talks, how they solve problems, and I'm able to review all those in a really neat way. We'll talk about how I do that in a moment. But it lets me know a lot about them as a person. So whatever alternative you use, again, should expose you to their work so you can learn a bit about them. It should set the expectations. For whatever method you use, it should be something that enables you to kind of hammer home, again, like what you expect as a company, what your standards are. So if we take the meetup organizers, something that achieves these things, maybe it's, hey, I've had 30 meetup organizers apply to host meetups. Let's get them in a roundtable to talk about why, or to talk about how you ban a difficult community member from a meetup, or to talk about how to enforce the code of conduct. That's a discussion that could be extremely valuable to the members. It shows you how those individuals would cope with that situation, and it sets your expectations. It shows that that's something that you would expect to happen under a meetup under your banner. And again, coming back to outcomes, it needs to communicate your outcomes. People need to walk away from that experience knowing exactly why they're taking place in this program. So, we've found out that we need this program, we've laid our groundwork, we have derived our outcomes, we've established trust. How do we go about actually scaling this thing? How do we take those dials and turn them all the way up to 11? So the first way is to use what's already there. When we started the Campus Experts training, sorry, there's a bunch of them in the audience in this photo. When we started the Campus Experts training, hi Roxy, we were doing it via asynchronous training, which meant for 8 weeks, Campus Experts had to join me in a weekly call to have a chat about the topic for that week, and this was just a nightmare for a whole bunch of reasons. Firstly, it meant to talk to the Indian students, so I was up at 4 a.m. on a Thursday. It was not great. Secondly, it just didn't scale. We had a limit to the amount of batches, to the amount of students we can include on these batches, and that limit was probably capped at around 30. In the first month of the training being open, the applications being opened, we had over 2,000 people apply. We were never going to get all 2,000 of those students who wanted to be involved through those 30-person batches. So we had to kind of flip things around and think, what does a scalable training look like? We wanted something that looked a bit like a MOOC, so something that's like Coursera or edX, and that had these qualities. It had to have a way for us to deliver content to participants. It had to be a place they could get support, a place they could submit their exercises, a place I could review that work, and a place where we would get easy metrics and automation kind of for free. I don't know about you, but this may be me seeing everything as a nail with which to hit my hammer with, but that looks a lot like GitHub to me. So that led us to our open training solution. So now we have a GitHub organization and a repository. This organization has over 1,000 student members in it, and this enables us to do some really cool things. So firstly, on the topic of use what's already there, it gives us all those things. GitHub has those. Secondly, it lets us use the tools built by the open source community for open source to help us. So to join the training, we have this really neat little OAuth app built by actually a GitHubber called Ben Bolter. All this app is doing is checking whether someone coming to our training has GitHub student discount. If they do, we know they're a student, we can add them to the training. Happy days. They get added to the org, they can see the private repo where the training lives. Because GitHub renders READMEs, it's a really great place for us to display our content. We actually have our designers make these beautiful badges and banners, and I'm using this really neat thing called GH polls to get like a YouTube-esque thumb up, thumb down immediate feedback. We can use the features, again, built for open source developers to help us. So this is the Sinatra repo, As a new contributor to Sinatra, you see I get this banner here that says, hey, it's your first time here. Why don't you read our guide? We can make use of those features to guide people for our training. New students coming to our training for the first time get this same pop-up, which links them to our documentation so they know how to go about completing the training. Pull requests are the most important part of this. Students go through the GitHub flow to complete our training. They fork our repo, and then they open a pull request with their exercise. Those pull requests enable us to do a line-by-line review, and we make use of things like canned replies. Here you can see Juan, our campus expert in Mexico, reviewing someone. We make use of canned replies to speed up our review process. So what we're able to really quickly, well, I say really quickly, currently the queue's really long, but we're able to, in theory, get to students really quickly and review their work in a way that's really helpful to them. And students love this training. For those of you who are familiar with Net Promoter Score, we have a Net Promoter Score of 60. For those of you who aren't familiar, Disney's is 50, so we're clearly better than Disney. So, the campus experts also say some really fantastic things about the training. I particularly like feedback like this, where they say their feedback actually encapsulates our core outcomes. We want them to improve their communities, and here the student is saying that the training let them dig deep into the problems of their community and identify how to solve them. That's hugely awesome feedback for me. And another piece of feedback that I particularly love is this one. This one is great from a product perspective because this is on our module about Atom. Here we can see that a student, after watching this module, has published their first Atom plugin. Another great thing about this is you'll see here they mentioned Kim explained. Kim was the campus expert I mentioned earlier. This is content actually created by a campus expert, which has now got a student to this point, which is just a super awesome outcome for me. We also use this same system in the back end. We don't use it for the training, we use it for people who have become an expert. Here you can see how we track our events. Whenever a student does an activity, they open an issue. Those issues are on the topic of helping me get metrics for free. You'll see there's very aggressive labeling here. I can use the GitHub API to immediately pull these out into a dashboard so I can see exactly what's going on. But what's really neat about this is because they're opening issues in the community space to talk about the activities they're doing, is not just me who's able to help them. Other members of the community do and regularly dive in. A great example is Amy organized a Women in Tech conference in Nottingham, and two of the other campus experts, Sarah and Roxandra, actually were able to go down to that conference and help out. My favorite example is Sandra at Hack Illinois. Sandra was asking us if we had any talk templates, and at the time we didn't. So 5 campus experts jumped in with their existing GitHub talks. We're like, here you go, use mine. And that was just a super nice thing to see. And those interactions are happening every day. And again, this is really important for scale. If I don't get to an issue or I don't have the answer, that's not a big deal because the campus experts probably do. We've built a community of community builders that are providing themselves a support network. Again, to the theme of using what's already there, we can use the tools used by open source developers to help ourselves. Here I'm using Probot to set myself a reminder because I am a literal garbage fire. So Probot will actually drag me back into that issue in a couple of days to provide the support I said I would provide. And a lot of this comes down to making use of open source methodologies. During the onboarding, I make it very clear that Campus Experts is not something that has like 12 people have got around a table and designed and said, this is how it shall be. It is something that's grown organically from the needs of the students, and they are welcome to make any changes. And they do that in the ways that are most effectful. We are an under-resourced team in terms of engineering, but we're talking to a bunch of students who are keen to be developers, and they do things like add amazing new features to the website. A really core feature, the displaying of Campus Expert badges on profiles, was built by a student. So they're able to fill in our gaps that I'm not able to do. They frequently catch my awful Ruby bugs, and it's really great and super helpful. The organization, although we follow open source methodologies, all of our repositories are private because of the presence of student data. So we keep everything private, only students can get into the repository. So we're actually closer to something called inner source, which is basically practicing open source methodologies within a company setting. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend reading it. We do this really great PDF that you can get here. It's really useful. There's an O'Reilly book about it as well, I think. That's like 20 pages. It's actually published as like a full book, but it's really short. So I highly recommend checking into that. And then you should also plan for future scale, and the badges are a great example of this. Cool. Our badges are, in theory, they're access control for the benefits. So in order to access a particular benefit, you need to complete the training module. There's a reason for that. The main reason is that if we link resources to training, we know those resources are going to be well used. For example, if we talk about the fundraising module, this module teaches students to budget efficiently and to budget responsibly. So if we then sponsor a student that has done the fundraising module, we know they're going to use our cash well. When I talk about plan for future scale, I'm talking about these badges because we don't currently enforce this system. This is a system that's in place. Students are earning badges as they complete the training, but with 60 campus experts, we don't need to gate the benefits in this way. When we get to 200 campus experts, 1,000 campus experts, maybe we will have to gate them, and we can just flip the switch and turn the system on. And this is all about giving me a really easy way to say yes or no and not having to think about anything in between. With the combination of the trust and systems like this badge system, when a campus expert comes to me and says, hey, I need X, Y, Z, I know, cool, you're qualified, I trust you, you've done the right training, I can say yes if we're interested in that thing. And that's a really great thing about these programs in general, and going back to local knowledge, it lets you be objective rather than subjective. When all these hackathon organizers send me their prospectuses, I have no real way to actually check whether, I have no way to know whether that event is valuable and whether we should be engaged in it. But with campus experts, if it comes from them, I know it's probably going to be great. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to nip through this bit. So there's a great scale you can use, basically run alphas and betas. As you make a new feature, make it invite only. As you start to hone it, make it open. But if you've got something where you want to kind of test something in a friendly environment, make it invite only. So for example, when we made this new training, we initially found that the training wasn't teaching everything we wanted it to teach. But because we'd slowly scaled up using this scale, it wasn't a huge drama. Final really important part here, inclusivity does not imply scale. Scale does not imply inclusivity. Just because you're bigger doesn't mean you're reaching all the right audiences. Plan for diversity in your scaling. Make sure you're still doing proactive outreach. We actually found when we changed to the open training model that our diversity went down in a pretty significant way. So we're now doing outreach programs to address that. So make sure that you plan for the same. I'm really sorry, I'm nowhere near done. Okay, so iterate. I'll nip through this really quickly. Once you've done all that, go ahead and do it again. There will be new support needs from your users, from the external advocates that will let you build new programs. Our examples, we have campus reps. We found out that for users in the United States, it was hard to get hold of me at key times. So we solved that support need by kind of promoting experienced campus experts to a paid position that enabled them to be the face support in their region. From that, a campus expert turned intern, now turned contractor on their engineering team, actually also built Field Day. Field Day is a solution to two problems that we identified. One, that schools weren't collaborating in their cities or regions, and two, that campus reps were struggling with a channel to get the word out to people in their regions. So Field Day is a student unconference when we bring technical communities together to talk about best practices around building communities. It's a program that came out to support needs of our users. We built content to address it and then wrapped it up in amazing branding. Our latest example is, as I mentioned earlier, our review queue on our open training is actually pretty big. It's currently 160 exercises that we need to mark, and it's a bit like marking homework. Luckily, a bunch of campus experts realized that that wasn't good enough, and they've asked me if they can help with reviews. So we've now built a reviewer training based directly on their ask to help them get involved with scaling the program. So let's briefly recap. So first, start with your groundwork. Make sure that the need for an external advocate program is actually coming out of your strategy and not just panicking due to metrics. Make sure that the outcomes are coming out of the needs of your users. Why are your users asking for the things they're asking for? Make sure your program addresses that. Trust is the central pillar to this framework. Without trust, you cannot scale, because micromanagement does not scale. Operationalize everything you can. Use the tools that are already there, and make use of robots and anything you can wherever you can. And finally, don't forget that's not the end of your program. You should keep on looking for inbound support requests and iterate and build new layers. Before I end, you should work with us. So a couple of things. Firstly, we have partnerships. So I've mentioned we have this training and we have training modules. A core part of those training modules is providing content to students who, I kid you not, are desperate for content. Students who deliver weekly workshops on their campus, which is a lot of them, can never get enough amazing content. This module here, the Git Tips and Tricks module, came from our partner GitKraken. They gave us a module about solving common Git problems using their software. I want to work with you to provide those modules as well, so if you've got anything interesting to teach new developers, come and chat to me and we'll find you a platform to basically distribute your content to universities all over the world. Secondly, I mentioned it this morning, but you could do what I just said, but for open source maintainers. Doesn't that sound great? You should find out about that at github.com/about-jobs. And finally, if you're doing this as well, or you're building external advocates, in this 20 minutes, I haven't been able to mention half of the things that we do to help scale this program. I want to talk to other people who are doing the same thing, and I want to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. I'm hoping to start kind of a Slack GitHub community for people who are doing a similar thing. We're almost there. My logo didn't get here on time. It's fine. But if you're interested in that, come and ask me, and I'd love to involve you in that. Other than that, thank you very much. I've been Joe Nash.